Hello everyone. So this week we are going to do experiment 6, which is limiting reactants. So in this experiment you're going to learn how to observe and interpret a precipitation reaction, and we're going to learn the technique of vacuum filtration to separate a solid from a liquid, and also interpret the molecular, total ionic and net ionic equation for a precipitation reaction. And then we're going to learn how to calculate the theoretical yield and the percent yield for a chemical reaction, and identify the limiting reactant in a chemical reaction. So let's see what we need for this experiment today. So you will need calcium chloride and sodium carbonate. Those are going to be our reactants, and we're going to need weigh boards, spatulas, and then we need 2 flasks, flask 1 and 2. Then we need a deionized water, a graduated cylinder, and another weigh board and a filter paper to filter our product, and a vacuum filtration setup along with acetone. And then the first thing is you are going to take your flask 1 and 0 the balance. Excuse me. Tear the balance first, and then you're gonna weigh your first Erlenmeyer flask and record the mass, and make sure to write down all the significant figures that the balance gives you. And to the first flask we're going to be adding calcium chloride. So you're going to take your weigh board, and after you put the weigh board on the balance, you're going to tear the balance. And for the first flask you're going to be adding 0.7 to 0.8 grams of calcium chloride. So first you're going to get that into a weighing board instead of directly measuring it onto the Erlenmeyer flask. That's between 0.7 to 0.8 grams calcium chloride. After you pour it, you're going to get the mass of the flask 1 and calcium chloride, and make sure to 0 the balance before you put your flask again. Write down all the significant figures that the balance gives you, and that is your flask 1, and this is for the first trial. We will be doing 2 trials, and this is the first trial. And this solid need to be dissolved in water to make an aqueous solution. So you're going to take 30 milliliters of distilled water into the graduated cylinder, and then you're going to pour it into flask 1, which you have calcium chloride in it. And you're going to swirl the flask until the solid is completely dissolved. Now your flask 1 with calcium chloride is ready. And then the next reactant is going to be our sodium carbonate. So we need another flask, which is going to be your flask 2. Tear the balance, and then get the mass of the flask 2 and record the mass. Just like before, you're going to get your second weighing board Put it on the balance and tear the balance. Make it 0. And then sodium carbonate, you're going to be adding between 0.9 to 1.100 grams. That's going to be your sodium carbonate. So you're going to pour that amount into your V-boat. And this will go to flask number 2. And you have to get the mass of the flask number 2 with sodium carbonate. Now you know what needs to be done. So another 30 milliliters of distilled water to the graduated cylinder. And you're going to pour that into flask number 2. So we are going to make an aqueous solution of sodium carbonate. After all the sodium carbonate solid dissolve in water, what are we going to do next? So make sure to dissolve it. Now you can see that the flask 2, which has sodium carbonate, is not completely dissolved. So you can add a couple more milliliters of water to get it to completely dissolve. And then the next step is you're going to mix the two. Carefully pour flask 1 into flask 2 and then wait 10 minutes to allow reaction to complete. So you see here we added sodium carbonate and calcium chloride together and we got a milky solution. And what we have in the flask is the calcium carbonate, which is your white precipitate, and the sodium chloride, which is going to be soluble in water. After 10 minutes, we're going to do a vacuum filtration to separate calcium carbonate from sodium chloride. So now we're going to be doing the vacuum filtration. So you will have to use a pre-weighed weighing board and a filter paper. Turn on your vacuum. So after you turn on the vacuum, before you pour your calcium carbonate sodium chloride solution, you have to put a little bit of deionized water onto the filter paper to have a good adhesion and a suction. And then you're going to pour your calcium carbonate solution over the vacuum Buchner funnel. And if there is any residue inside the flask, you can add a little bit of deionized water, swirl it around and pour it back onto the Buchner funnel. Now this is going to be your calcium carbonate precipitate. And where is the sodium chloride? You can see that the sodium chloride is now dissolved in the filtrate solution. And then after we filter our calcium carbonate, you can take about 5 milliliters of acetone and then pour it over your calcium carbonate. That will help to dry the water fast. And then you're going to let it sit on vacuum. And you're going to turn off the vacuum carefully and lift the filter paper with a sample using a small spatula and place it in a pre-weighed weigh board. Now our calcium carbonate precipitate is ready. You're going to take it to the balance, zero the balance, and weigh the dried filter paper and the weigh board. And you're going to record the mass. Now you have to do trial 2. You're going to use the same procedure as trial 1. And this time you're going to be using 2 different amounts of calcium chloride and sodium carbonate.